Start the music? Cool. All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Justin Fowler, Director of the Portland Architecture Program at the University of Oregon. I'm here representing the Lectures and Events Committee at UO's Department of Architecture. I'm thrilled to be here tonight in the beautiful new home of Skylab Architecture to celebrate the launch of a book that documents the firm's deep entanglement in the region and its innovative contributions to our built environment here in Portland and beyond. Given the continuing interest and inspiration Skylab's work sparks in our students, I know they're also very excited to be here as well. So firm founder and principal Jeff Kovel has suggested that the forms in Skylab's work are driven by the search for a moment of epiphany. So here form is conjured in service of the production of experience. So to produce the feeling of climbing into a space that doesn't yet exist, or of seeing something familiar from a new vantage point. Choreography here is important, as they suggest, and to be sure theirs is a kind of high-wire architecture, always seemingly charged with potential energy. In projects as diverse as the Columbia Wastewater Treatment Engineering Building, Yard, the new Serena Williams Building at Nike, or even something as small as the pavilion at Whitview Park, space becomes plastic, material is rendered expressive, and nature is amplified and refracted. Echoes of the work of John Lautner and Gordon Maddox-Clark are evident, as is the firm's love of music, as you can tell from the intro here. But there's also a highly graphic quality to Skylab's work, be it in the evocative wall coverings and material finishes in their projects, or in its capacity to thoroughly engage brand identity and exact of the client. The choreography here extends across all scales. Likewise, the new book is an impressive work of total design in itself. As they describe it, quote, presenting more than 2 decades of award-winning work, Skylab, The Nature of Buildings, might be the first architectural monograph conceived as a double vinyl album. The book is less a static archive of past work and more a continuation of the practice by other means. The inks, the varied paper stocks, the fold-out posters, and the lively arrangement of content all play off of each other in this luxurious album of a book. Having worked on a number of publications over the years myself, I know firsthand what a monumental achievement this document is. And I also know the tremendous value a thoughtful editor and a thoughtful graphic designer bring to the table here. In that spirit, we're hoping tonight to have a discussion here on Skylab's work through the lens of narrative design and the process of bookmaking. And I'm pleased that in addition to Skylab's Jeff Kovel, we're joined by Ben Halpern, the book's editor, and Karen Hsu, the book's graphic designer. So by way of introductions, Karen Hsu is a founding partner at Omnivore. As they describe it, Omnivore is a 3-person, female-owned graphic design firm located in Brooklyn, Portland, and Los Angeles. They're second-generation Asian Americans, working mothers, design educators, small business owners, food lovers, justice seekers, and friends who have been collaborating since 2002. Karen received a BFA in graphic design from Oregon State University and an MFA in graphic design from Yale University. And she is on the board of the Portland Art Museum Contemporary Arts Council. Ben Halpern is a senior designer at Global Retail at Nike. Previously worked as an architect and associate at Skylab. He also spent time in the offices of Para Project, SoftLab, and OMA. He received an MArch from the Harvard Graduate School of Design and a BA and a BS from Stanford. And lastly, Jeff Kovel is the founder, design principal, and creative director of this quote-unquote band of makers, architects, designers, brand builders, and entrepreneurs known as Skylab. Together they work across a wide range of projects that revitalize communities, give rise to cultural epicenters, and create competitive advantage. We work across the US. The firm is known for projects that explore narrative storytelling, innovative approaches to design and construction, and the regenerative continuity between the built environment and nature. Jeff landed in Portland over 2 decades ago, following his architectural studies at Cornell, and has been a creative force in the region ever since. So as a quick note on the run-of show, Karen and Ben will each provide some context on themselves and their work, and then Jeff will provide a brief introduction on the firm and the new book. Then we'll have a conversation with all of our panelists here, followed by some time for Q&A with all of you here in the audience. And then after the conversation, there will be books available for purchase, and Jeff will be available to sign them. So now, without further delay, please welcome Karen, Ben, and Jeff.
GPS. I first want to say thank you to Jeff and Ben and Justin and all of you. It's nice to be here. Also, I'm 1/3 of Omnivore, and I think that's also like a really important thing to note because like, Omnivore's collaboration has been a big part of just how all this work came to be. So as Justin mentioned, Omnivore's Alice Chung, Julie Taylor, and myself working between our own cities, Brooklyn, Los Angeles, and Portland. Our origin as a design studio kind of foreshadowed changes in people's relationship to work. We started in 2002 in New York City without a formal studio space. We would talk about projects on the subway and exchange files and printouts on 7th Avenue. We dreamt about geographic flexibility, but we also wanted to keep our work close and be connected to the craft of our process because we honor all parts of the labor of design. Julie joined us in 2007, and soon after, both she and I moved to the West Coast. As working mothers, our studio life is interwoven with a lot of chaos. In terms of our studio practice, we collaborate on a range of work from large scale to visual identities and brands. We make books and invitations. And we found over the years that we feel energized by collaborating on projects that we feel fully invested in, that ask big questions, that really try to change and shift culture, or see things in a different way.
Thank you for having me, Justin, everybody. So I'm Ben Halpern. As Justin mentioned, I was a long-time member here, where I put the book together. I'm now at Nike on the global store design team. And I thought I'd give a little bit of introduction as to how me as an architect and designer got into this bookmaking role. So like most people here, I would assume I like design books. I've long used them as part of my own process as a source of inspiration. But I think beyond that, I've always appreciated how the authors can use books to situate their work within broader critical discourse. So two of my earliest architect heroes were Remco Haas and Bernard Schumi. I spent hours and hours and hours with these books when I was in school. They were very formative to how I developed as an architect. And I think for me it was the work itself, but it was also the context, the cultural context, political, historical, theoretical, kind of how they were able to shape their work through the book form. So then in graduate school, I started making books. Some of these were self-initiated projects. The ones on the left, like for my thesis or for a travel fellowship. But I also became involved in the school's publications department. And I worked on a couple books that way in an editorial role. This one was one of the annual compendiums that the GSD puts out every year, and I was on a team of student editors for that. So it was only natural after a couple of years of Skylab that I would find my way into making a book here. And I think the reasons were that I knew the portfolio very well. I knew the process intimately because I did it every day as a day job. And I felt that what was missing was a kind of overt attitude as to kind of the meaning behind the work, like what drove our decisions, what was our thesis, what was our rubric for success. And so for me, I thought, as an architect, but also a writer and kind of a thinker in this space and with a background in bookmaking, I felt like I was well positioned to enable Skylab to make this book. Jeff.
Thank you also for all coming, and thank you both for being on this journey. We're a great team. and it's been really fun. We've been through a lot together, and it's great to kind of sit down up here together and survey backwards how we got here. I'm going to get into that a little bit more deeply in a minute, but thank you all as well for coming, and thanks to the U of O. We're excited to be able to host events here and engage in discourse, and it's a lot of the reason why we created this place, and so this is one of the first, certainly the first time anything's happened in this space like this, so it's really fun to look out and see all. So as I mentioned to some of you earlier, when I was young, like I think 7 years old or so, this is me on the right here, walking around a house that my parents built with a budding young architect and a pretty cool group of contractors, and I just became extremely enamored with architecture and construction. And I grew up in this house and got to see how this house kind of helped you kind of reinterpret the land and the light and the seasons, and just really was really fortunate to have a kind of a experience around architecture as a kid, and I just got on a sort of fast track to be an architect, and I knew what I wanted to do, and none of my friends knew what they wanted to do, and they really found it annoying that I was so committed, but I just was very drawn to getting involved in design and construction. And so that path took me through a lot of different career experiences. A lot of them were construction oriented. Some of them were not very glamorous, doing demolition and painting, and some of them got more creative and brought me through like a lot of the trades, and even just for fast experiences, doing some sheetrock and framing and hanging doors, and kind of learning from hands-on experience. And when I moved to Portland, I was really fortunate to get a job with a company called Architropolis, and right at that time we started working on a house in Miami, and this is actually me on the left on the job site in Miami, and we built this house for Lenny Kravitz, and it was extremely unusual kind of residence. There was a lot of unusual materials, and it was on the ocean, and there was outdoor space, and I was the carpenter in this fur tunnel, for example. So not only just doing carpentry, but like learning how to make compound radiuses intersect each other, and really enjoying it, honestly. That was some of my favorite times, were just having the tool bag on and oscillating between meetings and conference calls and sketching and drawing details, and then being hands-on. And so when I got back to Portland from there, I started Skylab because I just felt like I was 26 and I felt like I knew everything, and I had all the experience I knew to start my own company. So I actually went out and did it, and not too long afterwards, found this property on Montgomery Drive, which is just above, like between Vista and Portland State, and watched this property kind of drop in price over about a year. Finally walked up onto the site and was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Made an offer, bought the land, built a spec house, was the architect, the developer, the contractor, and it's a long story, but essentially this was the project that accelerated Skylab's portfolio from being like small renovation work to being a ground up residence. And over the years, that kind of set us on a path where it was kind of snowballed and grew, and we're about 25, 26 of us now. This is in the Quonset hut before the renovation. We're a really fun group with varied experiences, lots of different types of projects and different types of firms and different cities, and we collaborate together on a really wide range of project types, and both scale and type and materiality, and all of our projects are really hoping to tell unique stories, and through our process really find an innovative outcome to a unique problem. I've talked a little bit about this place, but this is a building that I used to visit a long time ago, and came up for sale during the pandemic, and we were really excited, and were able to purchase it. Start to peel it away. You can kind of see this north wall here is the wall of the studio here. I wanted to not only create a place where you wanted to work, like essentially the sort of theme was like a playground for designers, but also someplace that would like demonstrate our ethos and also our skill set and how we approach projects and sort of, in a physical way manifest who Skylab was in 2022 or 23 versus what it had been in any of our previous locations. So for us, that connection to nature is really important. The fabrication space, the event space, indoor-outdoor flow, the collaborative working environments, modular construction, in this case, the CLT pods that we fabricated outside and brought in and erected. And then just the sort of also layers of kind of materials and playful languages and expressions throughout the space. And it's been really fun to be in here and to share the space. And one of the big goals for us is to help kind of revitalize the culture and dialogue in the city of Portland post-pandemic, because we feel like there was a lot of momentum that has been lost. And so our North Star through this has been, create spaces where things like this could happen. This is actually out there, which is an outdoor covered work environment. So that leads us to the book, which was actually funny. We did a little timeline here, looking backwards, just to get a sense of like how long this project took. And this, in 2013, we started some conversations with publishers on this project. So, essentially, it's about a 10-year from initially thinking about doing this to execution. At that time, I think we were hesitant because we felt like the work, there wasn't enough built work to really fill out a volume in the way that we wanted to fill out a volume. It was also the kind of like a little bit more of a pay for play, like the book publisher we were talking to it felt a bit like just a big brochure that we were creating, and less of a critical kind of investigation into work. And so the project went kind of dormant for a while, and we went back to the drawing board, and we kept making work, and in 2018 kind of picked back up the idea of the book, and Randy Gregg, who's a local, he was the architecture critic for the Oregonian for a long time, and now he's involved in a lot of things, but he's a critical thinker in architecture and a writer, and has done some really interesting books and exhibits. We engaged with him to help us, and it started there, and I'll take you through kind of a series of events that happened, but we went through a series of exercises, trial and error experiments, that ultimately led to landing on the book that we published. And that process at first felt really dry to us. Like we were working with Randy and even Ben initially, and we were just looking at like tables of contents, and we're all really visual people, and we really like to make things and try things, and we felt like it just wasn't working for us to sort of like get into a Word document and try to create something like this important in that format. And so at that time, we had just done like a corporate identity process with a company called This, a fellow named Toby Grubb, super talented guy, and he helped us kind of move Skylab back into this space where it was more of an open-ended brand, and helped us kind of identify some of our values and kind of outward communication materials. And so it was natural that we said, hey, Toby, help us design a book. Like, we just didn't make something, we want to start working together. And we just want to start making something. We don't know where it's going. But and so he helped with an initial concept. And it's beautiful. It had some of the DNA of where we ended up. It was a physical object. It was really looking at the craft of the book and like the available processes and kind of materials in a book, and you know, the same way we might do that in a building. There was really an analogous kind of exploration, and we actually came up at that moment with this idea of wanting the book to be inspired by a music album, and there was a lot of thinking behind that. But like when I was in school, particularly, it was kind of pre-internet, which sounds really crazy now. But like our only way to find out about our other architects was to go to the bookstore, really, or to maybe get architectural records once a month. You know, it was like the act of going and seeking out these architecture books was like very analogous for like finding music you like and whatnot. And so, you know, for me, like creating a physical object like this, and now it's a digital world, it felt like we needed a fundamental kind of underpinning about why we were doing that. And so we set out to want to, you know, craft something that it's turned out to be like a bit of a greatest hits album, but it wasn't the intention. But that where you can kind of get inside Skylab, get under the hood, learn about kind of what's happening behind the scenes, projects in the space, the same way that like liner notes would do that in an album, and learn about the artist essentially through kind of something they made with that intention of sharing it. And this is really beautiful. We loved the outcome, but we really felt like it was more of a portfolio than a true kind of unique project and unique outcome. And so we stepped back. We started talking to publishers. This is kind of Ben's work, but some of his research, talking to basically everybody that we thought was making beautiful publications. Through that process, we landed a deal with Thames and Hudson, a European publisher, and that really is what got us kind of off the benches in a way. And at that time, we also felt like we wanted to go outside of our identity and kind of move beyond like the expected and move beyond maybe a conventional approach to the book and get to something that was full of, you know, more of a risk-taking adventure, more of a, like something where we didn't know where we were going while we were going on that journey. We didn't know where the outcome was. And so we had actually had Karen's company in 2013 did a proposal for the book, and we sort of said, okay, we need to stretch out and reopen the lens, and we started a conversation about engaging Omnivore to help us design the book. And if you look at Omnivore's portfolio, it's beautiful. It's also extremely diverse, and there's not like there's not a lot of repetition in the content. You know, it's really, and we felt like that was a really good match for what we're trying to accomplish with our projects. And so we started down the road with them, and kind of, I think everybody, you know, continued to believe that this idea of this analogy between architecture and music made sense, and we went through a series of exercises, kind of looking at albums, looking at what made them interesting to us, looking at tools that artists have used over the years to communicate with their audience, and then went through a whole series of like basically construction documents for bookmaking, which I never knew this kind of thing existed. It was really interesting because I'm trying to figure this out. I think we were also trying to make a book that was very atypical. Like we were trying to essentially make a double album that you could open and peruse and have fold-outs and whatnot, but would never come into multiple pieces. So that became quite a challenge to figure out how it would all fold together and whatnot. And we were really, you know, also super intrigued with a couple of problems. One was that Skylab's work, it's really hard to sort of edit it into something that makes sense together because it's so varied. And we felt like while we had gotten to this point where, you know, using Nike as like the last project where we had, you know, 10 or 12 kind of epic case study projects, we also had all of these really important steps along the way that were vital to making the work, but it's really difficult to put like the Doug Fur Lounge next to the Serena Williams building and have a dialogue about it. And so, that was honestly one of the hardest parts of this, was getting to the right format and the right sequence and the right kind of physical object. And where we landed was this essentially choreographed experience where, starting with the cover and the kind of engagement with the exterior and the facade, you start to move into the book, learn about the company. The book's organized in sections that are kind of our three main kind of principles in our design work, and then move through a series of like long twitch or longer experience and fast twitch, kind of like a rhythm to get through kind of the volume in a way, and now it's in our mind of like the way a composition would have kind of a rhythm and a story arc and whatnot. And then, while we were thinking about that, we were also just making stuff. So like this was something that had actually come out. Originally it was on our website, because even though people think all of our buildings are black, there's a lot of color in our work. And so we actually have a filter on our website where you can press what color you're looking for, and all the pictures of that will come up. So there's a sort of like rainbow of creativity, kaleidoscope of creativity. And somebody in our studio had created this document. And so, in an act of making, Karen's group kind of took that kaleidoscope and kind of took that to the next level, and that became really a foundational piece for us. And simultaneous to that, we were kind of going through these exercises, really trying to figure out what these interludes would be. And the interludes are these fast twitch projects, and so we came up with the idea of using rock and roll posters as a way to sort of create something that had like a unique, like instinctual artistic response to a project. So instead of just showing pictures of it, it was actually creating a piece of artwork, kind of reinterpreting it. Rock posters have been like a big piece of our world, both through owning and managing Doug Fur for 15 years, but also we've had events at Skylab every 5 years for anniversaries where we've hired somebody to design and live silkscreen posters at our events, and it felt very native. And so we started weaving these kind of fold-outs essentially into the experience, and looking kind of ad nauseum at like layouts and wanting to use text and copy and layout in really, kind of expressive ways, while still having kind of this fundamental underpinning. Re-looking at all of our drawings and reassessing the line weights and trying to develop that whole set of content, and then like creating all these posters basically, and having them, kind of a whole design process that wasn't really the book, that was in the book, happening simultaneously. And Karen and her team figured out in the end how to do this and have it all work and be structured and be this kind of engaging experience. It was a very physical process. We had lots of mock-ups. There was problems, we solved problems, we had renderings. The way the book works is there's a hole, which is supposed to be like the center of a sleeve on an album protective cover. And then inside of that, you get to see the sort of mostly the green plants and landscape work of Skylab, kind of as that way in. No album would be complete without an explicit lyrics kind of warning, and so this became kind of a negotiation with our publisher. They wanted to have some more information on the exterior, so we created this sort of peel away layer, and then the book kind of emerged. And so the way the book ended up, I think there's some copies that you guys are welcome to piece through, is you get into the book, you get into the sort of kaleidoscopic immersion of Skylab, and you get to the A side, which is the first side and the four-sided album. You start to experience like this playful collection of typography that in color and printing techniques that like you normally just wouldn't really think go together, but in this case were put together as you move through the book and the products reveal themselves to you. Yeah. as a critical layer of this, we also wanted to kind of get into dialogue and write about the work and look at our own process and have others look at it. And Mimi Zager is actually a classmate of mine at Cornell. She's an architectural critic at LA, a wonderful person. And so she came up, we spent 3 days with mostly Ben and I, and we drove around all of our projects and talked about architecture, and she wrote this incredible essay called Wet Sounds, which is a play on pet sounds. She really took to one of the things that I had been talking about was like the writer Tom Robbins and his influence on me, and she found this quote, which we felt this was from a graduation speech that he gave that we found and brought to the table. And it says, "Refuse to play it safe, for it's from the wavering edge of risk that the sweetest honey of freedom drips and drips." And we just love that, because it's like, that really expresses kind of who we are at Skylab, and it's like we don't take the easy way with just about anything. You know, it's like we're really invested in getting out there and taking risks and exploring, and this book, I think, is a testament to that. It's really not what you'd expect. As you move through, Ben helped write some great copy about regeneration, narrative building, and speculation and strategy, which are kind of the pinnacles of our work. We staged 3 conversations with invited individuals inside of our buildings, and Randy narrated them, and we were able to kind of cover a lot of topics. And this felt a lot more native than just writing about it ourselves. We really wanted to have that discourse. And then got into the book itself and laying out the projects and moving through the sequences and having these experiences kind of evolve and hopefully making an object which could compete with our kind of short attention spans and thumbs in the digital world, and gives people a way to get to know us, in a deeper way that our website could or any other form. I hope that was probably longer than expected, but that's the kind of context.
I'm a middle-aged mom, designing for a long time. Design is very much like a mirror to our culture, and over the years, it's like deconstructivism to designer as author to non-design, design thinking, and one of the perspectives that Omnivore has is that design now, at least for us, very much is a conversation. So,
and for me, like many things at Skylab, you kind of you don't get given anything, you just start doing it, and then at some point the publisher is going to ask who's the editor on the book, and Karen says, I think that's Ben. And so that's kind of how it happened. But actually another guy, the art director in the office, it was kind of his project until he left during the pandemic in 2020. And it was that first summer at home when things had started to slow down work-wise for us. And that's when I just started writing. I mean, I started talking to Jeff beforehand about the book, and I got into some meetings kind of sitting in the back. And then that summer is when Jeff and I just started talking about what regeneration meant. And we got into his thesis from Cornell and how some of those ideas and principles still applied in the work. And I was just fascinated that there's this undercurrent of meaning that we never really talked about, and we definitely never presented it publicly. And so for me, it was kind of an essay writing process. Some of that work turned into the book, or went into the book, and some kind of got scrapped. But then, yeah, it was a couple of months later is when we started working with Toby, and then the ball just kind of rolled, and it was just my side project in the office that was kind of my excuse if I didn't want to work on what I was getting paid to work on, and I had to work on the book.
I just want to add, if that's the fact that Skylab came back to us with a pretty clear concept. The thing that was the most interesting to us is they were also completely open to kind of backtracking and kind of rethinking, like, what can this object be? Like, what are the different ways you can think about, how a double album, for architecture is formed.
Maybe to draw a little bit of content here on the firm as well as the book. All right. So there's a recurring motif throughout the book, and some of you may have read it already, but hopefully this isn't a spoiler for those that haven't. And in the built projects themselves, of this desire to lead with nature at Skylab. This takes on many forms, from things like restoring habitats that have been carelessly developed, as in your sort of speculative Jansen Beach proposal, the Columbia building, this idea of not taking the brief as a given and opting instead to develop a site plan that saved the growth of trees. There's also a sense of that your collaborations with landscape architecture firms, such as 2 Inc. and Place, are absolutely essential for producing this kind of expressiveness in the work. And obviously this draws from the region, but also sort of transforms material into something really unexpected. So I wondered, Jeff, if you could talk just a little bit more about how nature informs the work at Skylab, and also how that manifests itself in the book. And then I guess secondly, the nature buildings, how did that title come about?
Yeah, well, when I was a teenager, I was, I think, a very dismayed by just the situation with the climate and the lack of sustainability and the sort of imbalance, mostly through kind of mowing down nature for human development. And for a long time, we really struggled with, like, how can you want to be an architect in a world that you felt like really needed less development, not more development, and convinced myself that the world was going to develop anyway, and so it needed probably people that were sensitive to those concerns to kind of help shepherd that process and see if there were ways to do it with better outcomes. And so that was really kind of like bedrock for me going into architecture school. And my thesis actually was, I'd been in Portland for a summer, and I'd selected a site about a mile from here. And it was at the intersection of the Northwest Industrial Area, Forest Park, and the Northwest neighborhood. And I really loved how those kind of forces were kind of just crashing into each other. And it was like, you had industrial with nature and humans trying to live, and it was like, well, how does this evolve? Like, where do you go from here? How do you sort of like evolve these things that feel like they're so ingrained that there's no solution for this conflict? And so in that case, the idea was to actually, they'd collected and buried all the streams from Forest Park and put them underneath what is now the Northwest Industrial Area, and then they basically all just culverts into the land. And so the idea was to recollect them all and daylight them and kind of reintroduce the natural process into the industrial area and create kind of ritual around that. And so it was like it's sort of a scientific research foundation that had created. But like the main idea was to basically bring like salmon spawning back into this industrial area and build a festival around that and a rhythm and reintroduce this kind of connection to nature. And so that was always really important to me. And then as we started Skylab, it was like the first 10 years it was really hard to get like sustainability to be the focus of the work. We were just trying to do anything to survive essentially and grow the firm and build a reputation. And so there was a while where like sustainability wasn't the driver, or regenerative design wasn't even something I understood at that moment. And then slowly it started to we found ways like that. One of the earliest projects was for something called NOW, which is NAU, which they have a shop now in the Pearl District, but they were a sustainable fabric, or a sustainable clothing design company that was founded in Portland, and they hired us to design their retail rollout spaces. And long story short, we designed an extremely innovative way of rethinking the whole way people build retail. And that year, that project won the AIA Honor Award for the state, which is kind of unthinkable that a project like a retail project would win what's supposed to be a building like Serena or something like that. And so we're finding ways to start to build that in, and then we got the Columbia building through this idea of saving the trees essentially and not following the brief, and we just sort of happened to have the right client and the right approach, and we were really able to build a building that was extremely conceptual and really focused on restoring native habitat into a place that had been really blighted by industry, and that partnering with nature to create a design. When I look at buildings generally, and it's really hard to find ways of making buildings that don't feel derivative of lots of other things you've seen, right? And for me, one of the most natural ways to create something unique is to find a vocabulary that other people aren't using. And so in this case, using nature, collaborating with nature, bringing nature in as a co-designer, and trying to find these outcomes, it creates these really unusual outcomes that don't look like anything else that you've ever seen, you don't experience in the same way. Yard is a really good example. Like that building's a park in the sky with a tower coming out of it. It's extremely unusual approach for a building, and that whole identity is kind of born out of this passion for rebalancing nature and mankind, or humankind, I guess. What traditionally we call man-made, which probably shouldn't be called that anymore. But that resetting that balance. As far as the nature of buildings, or the title of the book, I think we really like to have everything we do sort of leave some openness for interpretation. I think our projects in general, we think a lot about the ingredients of the projects, and we kind of serve them up in ways, but we really try to leave a level of abstraction there so that people can kind of bring to it their own interpretation, and they can explore and discover things, at their own pace, and they might come back to a building 2 or 3 times and see something they missed the first time. And I think the book we really wanted to have, perform kind of in a similar way. And the title, The Nature of Buildings, it's both it's talking about just buildings and what makes buildings interesting, or what makes the idea of building or making anything interesting. And then it's, kind of alluding to this idea of nature and the work coming together. And it's really meant to not, to leave it kind of open-ended and to sort of serve up that theme, I guess, in a way, so that when you approach the book and you read that, and then you see the images through the whole, and you enter through the natural kaleidoscope, that's the lens you're wearing when you start to look through the work. Because that's the thing that we feel like really makes the work the most unique, and we feel like it's the thing that we're really most keen on in terms of the future of the work, and continuing that exploration.
Is that the first title?
No. No, there was quite a few. There's probably 100, I would say.
Well, the first title, Toby came up with.
Yeah.
And it was Structure, Untethered.
Yeah.
And we liked it because we didn't really know what it meant. And so that stuck for a long time.
That feeds into the next question really well, which is, I also really love Meman Zeiger's intro. And she knows there is this tension between risk and structure in Skylab's work. And argues that improvisation is really integral to the ethos of the practice. Obviously, it's difficult to improvise as an architect, or at least with a physical object, which has a lot of different hands involved. But the book really plays with that tension. There's a lushness to the physical object. And there's various fragments that kind of appear, reappear in the fold-out posters and silvery site plans for many of the projects. And there's a variety of different, viewing and reading experiences with these sort of twisting text. You can't just sit there and flip through the thing without turning it or yourself or without interacting with the posters in some way. And as a reader, it does kind of put you on edge, which is kind of exciting. So I was wondering, Karen, Ben, what were the decisions that went into this kind of form of presentation for you? And how is this kind of like balancing of risk and improvisation and structure happening?
I've actually been thinking about that, like risk, structure, and improvisation, and just this idea that with this process, they were like three very kind of entangled concepts. And as designers, we try to create systems to help define and order. A designed object often has a set of rules, and you make the rules so you figure out when you break them. And I think with this, there were a lot of graphic risks, which were kind of amazing. Not everyone is open to spinning type and the header, footer, kind of folio text in the fluorescent green ink kind of marches around the spread to kind of reference the spinning. But one of the first things that we all agreed on was to go with the proportion of the record sleeve as a reference, and but it was also important to scale it down, so as a book it would be more comfortable to hold and to use. But then that brought like all these other kind of questions and issues, like with the flaps and how that affected the binding, and so the binding was actually kind of a result of wanting to keep the proportion of the inside cover flap as similar to the trim size as possible, so it would feel like an album sleeve, and then things like the interludes, those are completely based on the way the book is made, because the posters can only be sewn in either between signatures or half signatures.
Yeah, that's a great point. In terms of the structure that went into the book, like we just learned so much from Karen and Omnivore about how the book goes together, and like the whole signature thing just became like this guiding. It was almost like our gravity. It was like the projects had to be 8 pages or 16 pages or 24 or 32, and so it like having these constraints actually really helped us, because we knew that Serena had the most content. That was going to be a 2 signature book. Columbia was a 1.5 signature project, main track. And so it kind of let us work backwards from that, knowing that like technically how the book had to be made dictated some of how the content went in. And then on all the music metaphors, the square format, the die cut, the rotating text, it was actually the publisher who I found pushed back the most against some of those. Like they actually were not in favor of the cover that we all fought for really hard with the die cut. They thought it was too overt of a music reference. But I think for us, like it would be different if the content of the book was music, but because the content was architecture and music was this analogy and this metaphor that we were using, like we actually liked bringing it in, kind of flexing it as much as we could. And so that was a push and pull with the publisher. They didn't like text that you had to turn. Like they had for them the book should be legible, it should be easy to read. Fluorescents are hard.
We actually had earlier sketches, like we actually cropped text around page turns. So it's we were really playing a lot of risk. Actually, it was interesting looking back at the process, because I kind of realized, when we were starting to go back to like old files, the interludes were actually the most improvisational maybe of all, because like I think they kind of started out with liner notes, and then they became like these short pages, and then they became the posters. And so there really was a transformation throughout the process of just how these ideas were being like formally articulated.
I wonder, maybe to follow up with that, just the editing process. There's clearly a lot of artifacts, archival material. I mean, it was great to see, like, for example, images of the thesis project in the book. How do you decide what goes in, what gets cut? Like, how does that look?
Well, in terms of the projects themselves, like I started by making this spreadsheet of every project I could find on the server and not, and it was hundreds. I mean, the office had been around 23 years at that point. So it was, the easy part was finding what the main tracks, kind of the primary projects would be, and those are the 10 main projects we show. And then, like Jeff was mentioning, the interludes were these secondary projects that didn't quite deserve to be, a full, long-form presentation of the work, but were still important thematically to the book or to Skylab in other ways. So we knew those were the interludes, and then there was a whole set of other work that we felt still needed to be in Skylab's monograph. And so we were really particular about embedding those into the conversations. And so there's a lot of thumbnails that go with the conversations, and we had Randy kind of bring those up, or Jeff would bring them up in his answers, and so we got a lot of work in there, but it's all organized hierarchically in a way that kind of fits with the theme.
Karen, you have a lot of experience at Omnivore in publications, obviously environmental graphics, brand identity. When approaching a project like an architectural monograph, particularly for a firm that does have a very distinct attitude, very distinct brand identity, what does that process look like? And sort of, where do you look for sympathies between the work that you do and the material that you have to work with from another sort of creative client?
This is actually one of the questions I asked Julie and Alice about earlier. So
Yeah.
what do we say? It's interesting, as designers, it's like our process is very much like this push and pull between constants and variables, structure and essentially, kind of like feeling and then finding kind of moments of poetry in between. We try to start with language, ideas, coming from words, and then typography as like our first, foray into form. And then, in general, like we also see ourselves as translators, where we're trying to like listen and then take what we hear and use that as the basis for our form making. So the idea of, a company with a strong brand, like that just becomes part of like the landscape or the vocabulary. You could see it as a constraint, or you could see it as just a parameter or an ingredient. One of the things that I was thinking about with this, the book process was very much, Skylab looking backward to look forward, and so in a lot of ways, it also makes sense that, some of the investigations that, and experiments that we made, they, kind of become like food for the, for the firm's like, future imaginings, like thinking about things like, like the spectrum, which originated as like this very rectilinear collage. It was actually leaving one of the meetings at the office, Brent actually used the word kaleidoscopic, and it's like, that's what's been missing. Like it needed to be kaleidoscopic. And so that's, how that evolved, and I don't know.
One thing I'll add is kind of interesting is that serendipitously, we were looking at images of Skylab, the actual space station, like during this process, after the kaleidoscope had been made, and we found an image of the structure of the space station, which is a triangular diagrid in exactly the same proportions as the kaleidoscope graphic. And that was really curious moment for all of us, and really interesting. chance alignment.
Wondering, again, like I think this thing with the monograph really is very, very true to the practice, which I think is fantastic. It really isn't just this kind of like brochure, as you were saying earlier. I liked in your conversation, Jeff, with the Maurizio Villarreal Place, like landscape architecture you work with, how building and landscape are this kind of vehicle for storytelling. And you mentioned that, for instance, the garden of the Serena Williams building, and I keep still looking at its favorite flower, the white rose, which is not something, there's not like a sign that says that necessarily, but it's like one of these Easter eggs within the project. And so like, what would you say, like how do you bring those kinds of stories forward in the book? And also like what, are there any sort of design Easter eggs or Easter eggs that we might not know about that we should be aware of when we're flipping through it?
I wish I had read that question in advance. I mean, I think the whole idea of the Easter egg, is super inherent. Just to like we're always just trying to leave traces of thought starters, and I think it leads to that sort of improvisational approach where you can have a lot of influences and you can find ways to embed them in the work, and you don't. We really believe in the depth of the author when it comes to architecture. We don't think, you're not going to be standing in front of the building telling people touring through it very often, right? So that idea that people come to the book or to the building and they go on their own journey and they're engaged by those discoveries. And I think about it a lot, like songs, like when my wife laughs at me all the time because I like get the lyrics to all my favorite songs completely wrong all the time, and she corrects me, and I'm like, that to me, like it's my own experience with the song. It doesn't matter if I, know exactly what that said or didn't say. And it's like it's connecting with me and making me think of this, which is different than that. And like that's cool, right? It's okay. And that's that I think architecture and creating things I think should operate at that level, because if everything's laid out on a silver platter, then there's nothing for the person experiencing it to do. And I think the book for us, we really wanted to make sure that was present, I guess, in the experience. So in terms of specific Easter eggs in the book, I don't know if anything jumps to mind. I mean, I think one of my favorite things, I guess, about it is actually just exploring the kaleidoscope graphic, like that. Even having created or been on the team creating all of that, there's things in there that I have to sit and stare at for a while to figure out what it is and where it came from. And I really love that there's no color missing in the rainbow in the work, and I think it really speaks to this like pure, playful, explorative kind of like the same way like musicians don't leave out keys or notes or whatever in their exploration. I think color is that, and so I would say maybe just that kind of where's Waldo aspect of the kaleidoscope for me is maybe the key.
Any thoughts?
It's I mean, related to what Jeff said, I remember when we were having a lot of dialogue when I was writing the Serena section, that chapter. And there really there's so many little nuggets in that building that you would never know, like the type of flower in the garden, like the theme of the bodega on the ground floor, the text on the cornerstone. Like you probably wouldn't get it if you went there. And I asked him, like, who is this for? And similar to what you just said, but you said, Miles Davis isn't standing in front of his music telling you what it means. And like the point was that as architects, we just imbue as much meaning into the work, and then you just have to leave it to the occupants to kind of use through their experience and individual perception to get what they can. And I think we definitely treated the book the same way. Like there's so much meaning that I don't know, it's hard to talk about everything, like graphic design-wise, content-wise, in the work. And so I think what's nice is that we just treat it the same way.
I might be misdefining Easter egg, but the three things I really love. One is one of the Serena project photos actually has been in it because they needed someone to walk down the stairs. And in the end paper, we actually found in like the giant folder of images, there's a photo of Jeff with one of his kids as a baby, and so it was like, we have to use this. And then the other thing is, when we were working on the end paper and struggling to get it to align with the die cut, which was also like terrifying because machine tolerance is a real thing with printing. So with something like that, an eighth of an inch would be disastrous. But in positioning the logo against the triangular grid, there was a moment where we're like, I think we need to tweak the Y. And I said something to Jeff about that in a meeting, and like the look on his face, he was like, I wish you hadn't told me that. But what I've never told you is, in the end, we didn't have to do that. So if you forgot, I'm sorry. But if you remember, you can.
It didn't look at a level to me, so I think
this is maybe super obvious, but I mean, obviously there's a huge connection to music here with the book and the firm has a history of dropping Spotify playlists and everything else. I'm wondering, one, what are you listening to during the production of this book? Two, are there certain projects that just like scream a particular track or a particular album, if you will? Or, and then three, what are you listening to now?
I think I should answer last. Yeah. Probably boring answer.
I'll answer first, because mine was actually probably the most boring. So I find a lot of really great music from my daughter, but when I work, I actually listen to nothing. I actually whistle when I work sometimes.
That's easy, right?
There's a song about that.
Yeah, it's really scary. My whole family is like really freaked out. I'll whistle when I'm cleaning. They feel like it's the beginning of a horror movie.
I listen to a lot of Discover Weekly, to be honest. I can't search for music anymore. It's just, there's nothing to push a button. But while making the book, and this goes back to your question about the title too, when we were going through the 50 title options we had, Jeff brought up Houses of the Holy as like a really exemplary album title, because it's kind of strange, it's poetic, it's open-ended, and I had never listened to that before, so I listened to a bit of Led Zeppelin while making
I have in some ways a very narrow musical taste, and in some ways a very wide one. But I think when we work on the book, the thing that makes it there, like, it's horrible, and it's the pauses and the lack of notes and the space between things that really build the tension and make things powerful. And that's something that I've been thinking a lot about in general, and we've been having some great conversations around Nike, which is this sort of like wing form building. So there's literally voids that are equal to the building and an equitable array. And I think that just that sort of absence or that space between, that's the thing that kind of gets me excited now. So this is more of a book about music than it was just a specific piece of music.
This maybe is a final question here. Monograph publication often, it does mark a point of transition for an office. It's an opportunity to sort of critically reflect on the firm's work, to package it together for the world, and also to provide hints of sort of continuing through lines, future avenues for exploration and development. So Jeff, I want to give you a chance. What does this publication mark for the office and the practice of Skylab?
Yeah, well, it's super cool for us that building this new headquarters sort of reasonably aligned with the end of that volume. And there's actually quite a bit of work in the last couple of years that we've done that isn't in the book. So we're already kind of working on the next collection of projects to share. But I think that we had a few physical spaces leading up to this one, and I think those chapters were really important in kind of our formation. And now we're in this new space. We have this sort of incredible volume to kind of share and share with prospective clients and have, just talk about design dialogues around, which is really exciting. But most importantly, I think the process, it really helped us crystallize like the sort of pillars of our own design process. And what that's allowed us to do is kind of come at the design process with those pillars in mind in advance, it'll be really interesting to see how that changes things. Because it wasn't such an overt, like the idea of embedding narrative into the work was very overt always. This idea of like collaborating with nature as an equal partner and like actually literally starting the design process with that is a pretty big innovation. So I think that piece is really powerful, and it's also really helping us kind of connect with new clients and kind of like set the stage for what type of firm we are, what it would be like to work with us, what we're interested in, and it sort of help us get aligned with the right clients and the right projects. So I think it's going to have a lot of influence, both kind of in what types of parts we get and how we do the work moving forward.
All right, so I know we're running a little late, but I do want to give just a few minutes. There's a couple of questions from the audience. They're burning. Any thoughts? I know Jeff was generous enough to hang out with a lot of our students ahead of time. Any thoughts, questions? I've got one more in here, but it was more like if you wanted to ask each other anything, which is my backup.
I'll ask Karen. And I didn't give this to her, but what did you learn from working with Skylab?
I learned a lot about Skylab and Skylab's work, and I feel like I know you guys really well now. Actually, one of the things, so I didn't say this with an answer to another question because I forgot, but this idea of like working with a creative partner, like that's something that can either be like really fantastic or like really terrible, because there's this idea of asking questions, bringing ideas to the table, being respectful and openness of the creative process. Like that was like this was such a fantastic project. Like just all of like the ways that it evolved and what we were able to do. Like there was a real commitment to not compromise and for this to be like the best version of what it could be. Because I think everyone here probably knows what it's like to work with someone who's like, move this here, put it there, do it this way, and so yeah, I guess.
That was a good answer.
Okay.
Any questions?
What was I going to say? Sorry. No. Hold on, give me a second.
Karen, this is your turn to fire back.
Oh,
no.
sorry.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I got up really early this morning. I was just thinking about like what it means to finish something, because it's like I think that's always an interesting topic. Is like when is something done? In buildings like you tend to have a schedule and you have to hit the mark, and oftentimes you can't go back and adjust things. And one thing I would say about Karen and Ben is when I felt like things weren't done, like they were incredibly gracious about continuing the exploration, and I try not to pull that lever unless it's really important. And I think a lot of that kind of collaborative relationship kind of comes down to that, right? And it's like a great painting, you can't find like a brushstroke that shouldn't be there, that type of thing. And I feel like the book, through that process, we all arrived at a place where like the pieces all sort of fell into a place, and we knew it was done when it was done, and some of it was scheduled driven or whatever, but I think that was just a testament to like our being able to collaborate really well together. I was often expecting Karen to maybe resist me more than she did. but I think she also had that same pursuit of, not necessarily perfection, but just completion.
Yeah, I feel like our meetings felt more like being in school and kind of giving a school credit, which was really nice, more than it felt like, client, designer, discussions. That was really nice.
Thank you all, and thank you to our amazing panelists. Please. And thank you again to Skylab for hosting this year. Thanks for coming out tonight. I'll see some of you tomorrow.
All right.